Hello and welcome to the Django DRF API Query Fundamentals course. My name is Xander. Now this tutorial is part of a whole course playlist available for free on YouTube. For deeper learning, the full course is available for purchase at Udemy. Find all of these resources and links in the video description. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for weekly promotions, discounts, and Udemy course giveaways. One of the goals that I've created for this course is to simplify the setup process so that you can quickly, easily move into the tutorials without having to worry about setting up or working through a number of steps to set up Django, the database tables, and then insert data into the database before we can then start to work through the different tutorials. Now, to automate the process of creating the database in the PostgreSQL database, we're going to actually use an initialization script, which we'll learn about more in the next tutorial. Now, in order to create this initialization script, we're going to need the SQL code to generate the database tables. So let's take a look at how we can use Django to export the Django database as SQL code. Now, if you're not familiar with SQL, SQL is a structured query language, a programming language used by databases to manage and manipulate relational databases. Okay, so let's get back to the terminal. If you need to exit because you are coming from the previous tutorial, do that first, and that should take you back to the default terminal. Right, so we're going to need to log into our Django container. If you don't have the container started, then just go ahead and run the commands to do that. So you can run docker compose. You don't need the build, just docker compose and then the D flag. That should start Docker. If you haven't already done that, I will quickly redo that, restart the containers. Okie dokie, it looks like it's taken a few seconds to recreate the Django container. So it looks like we're all good. Just double check to make sure that Django isn't flapping at all. You can see it is solid green, the Django app, so it looks like we're working. Right, we will need to work through the whole process just this once again. So let's delete the database that exists, if a database exists. Let's go into the migration. Let's delete the initial migration file. That also needs to be removed for now. So we're going to recreate the database and then extract the SQL code. Right, so let's first of all move into our Docker container, which is running. So we're going to move into the container. So we're now inside of our Docker container. Now we're going to make migrations to make a migration file so that we can actually create the new tables from our Django models. And then we go ahead and migrate. So actually apply that to the database. There we go. So we've actually now created our database tables, and we can right click, assuming you've got the SQLite extension, as I showed you previously. We can open up the database here and see all of our lovely tables in place. Fantastic. Right, so now what we need to do is we need to create the SQL code for all of these tables so that we can use it in our Postgres initialization script. Now, in actual fact, what happens when we create the migration file here, you can see that we can read this in clear text. In terms of fields, looks like the fields are going to be created for this table and so on. So it's very easy to read through this migration file to kind of work out what's happening. We're creating a new table. It's going to be the user table. These are the fields for the table. So Django is going to utilize this and convert this into SQL code. So we can inspect that code. So if we type in Python manage.py and then SQL migrate, and then the infantry app, and then a reference to the migration, which is 0001. That's the reference to the migration file. Press enter, and that's then going to provide you the SQL code that's generated from this migration file to create all the tables. Now, I've added the command here in the commands.md file, but what we can also do in actual fact, if we run this command again, if we use the right chevron, we can actually specify a file, migration.sql. So we can actually save it directly to an SQL file. So I'll go ahead and do that. You can see this new file appears. And now we actually have the SQL code for all of the tables in our database. Now, it's not very easy to read like this, and I do have a few different extensions. If I go back to my extensions here, I have the prettier extension and the prettier code format extension. And I think that's what I'm using here. I think. So I can right click on this SQL file and format document. And you can see that then that formats it into a little bit easier to read format for each table. So create table, and you can then see the table and then the information. So that's probably a little bit easier to view. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to remove the indexes. I'm not going to create the indexes here at the end. And I'll keep the commit there. We'll keep the commit at the end to actually commit right at the end. So I've removed the indexes. I'm not going to explain that now. We're just going to stick with the tables. So that should be all the information we need to regenerate the tables in our database. And there we go. So that's how we export the Django database as SQL. Now we're going to, in the next tutorial, utilize this to now automate the process of creating the database in our Docker container and then create the tables from this new SQL file.